The Paul Leslie Interviews.
Hello.
Hello, this is Paul Leslie. I'm trying to reach Mr. Tony Hatch.
Yeah, well, you've done very well so far because you've reached him first go.
Oh, wonderful.
I gave you a direct line, yes.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you? It's very, very unusually hot here in London right today. But I know it's hot where you are anyway.
Yes, it is hot here in the southeast.
but then you're used to that. That's what you expect, isn't it?
Indeed. So you're in London right now?
I'm in London right now in my office. I have an office in London, and that's very useful, very handy. We keep all our paperwork here, all our files. A lot of music is kept here, original. I mean, obviously one doesn't keep tapes so much now. We've transferred most of those over to digital, and we're quite efficient at archiving and making sure all the files are kept up to date.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that voice you're hearing, we are joined by one of the greatest composers of our time, Mr. Tony Hatch. Thank you so much for making the time to speak with us.
Thank you. And that is Paul, isn't it?
Paul.
I'm actually speaking to the Paul that I've had some email communication with already.
It's great to have you here. You've written some of the most successful songs of our time. What attitude or mindset do you credit with allowing these creations to be made?
I think always to enjoy myself. I've usually loved every song that I've written. I've never hated it. I recognize why it never some of the songs we write just don't grow up to be successful children, whilst others grow very strong and they mature. So a song such as Downtown or Call Me are the kind of songs that become embedded in the culture of many countries of the world, and especially I'm so lucky that America has warmed to my songs, and as you know, there are quite a few there, especially written for Petula Clark. But some earlier ones, I'm very proud of the one song that I wrote for Bobby Rydell. He arrived in London, and they said, "Would you write a song for him and record it and produce a session?" And he was a charming young man, and I was a charming young man as well, of course. And we got on great together, and we recorded "Forget Him," and it was a huge hit for him. And I'm very proud of those moments when I captured the imagination of the great American public.
If one wants to be a songwriter, or anyone in the music business, does it require a positive attitude?
It requires a very positive attitude. It also requires, it's very much like any art form. You study what everybody else is doing, and you learn your trade from working out how somebody has achieved an almost perfect song, and then you go off and you must do your own thing. Because I always remember that I was strongly influenced for a long time by Burt Bacharach and Hal David. But every time I wrote a song that was very similar to their construction, their structure, it never worked. And the one thing I remember about Downtown, from the moment that we first ran it through in the studio with the orchestra, was how different it was to anything else that was happening. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's against you because you're not going with the trend and you're not following the format that's successful. But for us, that was the right thing to do, as was proved. I didn't know it at the time, but it proved to be the case much later that it was the originality of this song and the whole idea behind it that was enchanted everybody.
Do you think originality is very important?
Totally important. I don't think there's ever been a really big hit that anybody could say, well, it's identical to another song, because you would always have that original song in your mind, and there's absolutely no point in making a blatant copy of it, and you get sued anyway.
which has been happening a lot lately here in the States, at least. Your mother was a pianist. What would you say is the greatest thing you learned from her?
The greatest thing I learned from her was to love music, because I have to tell you that I was born 1939. Now, that was the year that war was declared, and the Second World War started, and nothing much happened for 18 months. But I was a very small boy, and like many homes at that time, my father was off. He went into the Navy, and so we hardly saw him. And my mother was left to bring up the little boy, and she had a piano, because so many homes did have a piano at that time. So she played the piano, and she had a little record collection, mainly classical music. But she was always listening to the radio, playing the piano, and often she even took me to the theater. And I can remember being 4 or 5 years of age and going to some musical written by Noel Coward or by Rudolf Friml. And so I was very much steeped in the semi-classical and not so much the pop music, but very much a lighter style of music.
We're joined by Tony Hatch, songwriter, arranger, pianist. I wanted to ask you a little bit about Petula Clark. What would you credit her success to?
Originality.
Originality again.
I mean, that word comes over, but I mean, there is nobody like Petula. Nobody sings like her. And I always remember when we had finished Downtown, and I wasn't having much success with her at the time. And even when I took that particular record into the production meeting, people were sort of a bit ambivalent towards it. They didn't jump up and down and say, this is fantastic, this is going to be a huge smash. And I remember when Joe Smith from Warner Brothers Records, he came over to England, and he was the first person to hear it, and he said, I love that, I'm going to tell you. And I remember saying to him, don't you think it's very English, though? Don't you think the way Petula, just the way she sounds her words, don't you think that's a bit sort of polite? And he said, it's absolutely perfect. It's what makes it original. So that word was banged into me right from the beginning.
What do you think of America?
I love it. I love the country, and I have a great deal of fun there. I have friends all over the place, and whenever I get an opportunity to visit somewhere that I've not been before, I will do it. I'm very much part of the children's charity. I was even international president for a couple of years in the 90s. And so this year they decided to hold the annual conference. It's a 3 or 4 day affair. They decided to hold it in Atlanta. And a lot of people said to me, why do you want to go to Atlanta? I said, well, for a start, variety is there. Secondly, I've never been there, and I know that it has a great place in America's history of being part of the civil rights movement. And so I really enjoyed it, and we traveled there, spent a couple of days either side of the actual conference. And California, I love working there. I produce records with Petula Clark. In fact, I've been doing a program for BBC Radio here, Radio 2, about music in television. And the other day I had the great pleasure of interviewing Mike Post. And I kept saying to him, Mike, everything you do has this great American influence, has this great, New York influence. And I said, you must have spent a long time there. He said, no. He said, I wrote lots of successful themes for New York-based television series. He said, but I live in the West Coast and I work there. And so I just thought, well, he's got a great imagination and a great composer.
A lot of people ask songwriters the question, what is your favorite song? I don't like to ask that question because frequently you get the same answer. Well,
I think that I would have to say Downtown will always be the favorite because it's so special, and it started a career for me, and it started a new career for Petula, because the one country that she had not conquered, she was huge in Europe, but she was not doing anything in America at the time. And it was the best thing for her. But I love Don't Sleep in the Subway as well, because that is actually two songs. As it is very obvious when you listen to it. You know, there's the little verse part, ba-da-da-da-da, you wander around on your own, little cloud when you don't see the why or the wherefore. And then there's this very bouncy chorus, don't sleep in the subway, darling, which we put in an entirely different key. And in fact, the truth is, I was playing around with two different songs at the same time, and I was running out of time, and I had to go and see Petula Clark in Paris, and I was in Manchester at the time, and I said, oh, pardon my language, I said, to hell with it, let's put the two together somehow. And that's how Don't Sleep in the Subway was born. And I've always been pretty proud of that it was out of necessity that song came to life.
What did you think of the interpretation Frank Sinatra did of Downtown?
Well, it wasn't good, was it? It was unfortunate because it was a very strange arrangement, and I can't remember who did it. I don't know whether it was Don Costa or it may have been Nelson Riddle, but it had this strange sort of Oriental Hong Kong feel about it, and I think Petula was in the studio, in the control room, at the time when he was recording Downtown. As usual, he'd invited people to the studio, so they either sat in the control room or they sat in the studio, and I think she was there, and I think that he just found the whole thing a little bit embarrassing. It was not his kind of song. I actually I was going to make an album with Sinatra, as I found that two or three composers, writers, producers, orchestrators, they were all going to do an album, and I was one of those people. And I wrote him an absolutely beautiful swinging arrangement of Downtown, done in his style, like, Songs for Swinging Lovers, Swinging Affair, much more of just a nice, good swing arrangement. We never got around to recording it, but I think for him to try and do Downtown the same way as Petula had done Downtown was never going to work, and that was the problem.
You mentioned a couple of songwriters earlier. You said Burt Bacharach and Hal David. I'm curious to know, who are the songwriters who most influenced you?
Certainly, I love the way Burt Bacharach changes key, shifts around, and if you listen to a lot of my songs, you'll find that's happening a lot of the time. I thought Henry Mancini was a great melody writer, and you'll think that I'm talking about all the old guys, because Jimmy Webb is another one of my favorite people and favorite writers, but also Paul McCartney, fantastic writer, love it. I love all the music he's written, and especially the ballads like Yesterday and The Long and Winding Road. He's an incredible writer, an incredible structure he uses.
What do you think of Paul McCartney's song She Loves You?
I'm never sure who, at that period, I'm not sure who wrote what. That could be a marriage of the two writers. So it's a bit dangerous saying that's a McCartney song, because that might have a lot of John Lennon influence in it as well. I'm sure somebody knows, or somebody thinks they know, but I just don't know who is exactly responsible for that. Whereas I do know that only Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday.
Yeah. It's been said that Paul McCartney said that She Loves You. Isn't it true? I could be wrong here, that it was influenced by Bobby Rydell's song Forget Him?
And there's some story about that, but I don't think my song influenced his. But I think he really enjoyed Forget Him, and I think it just sort of inspired him.
What did you think of Bobby Rydell's recording of Forget Him?
I loved it, but when I listened to it back afterwards, I think I recorded it too fast. But that sort of tempo and that feel was right at the time. But every time I listen to it now, in fact, occasionally I do little shows myself, and often I perform Forget Him, but I do it much slower, and I do it as a very warm ballad, and it seems to work very, very well. Maybe we'll have another go at it, but I can't take it away from Bobby. He did a fantastic job, but it is a very sort of, don't you think it's a bit bouncy for the mood? Forget Him and Please Come Back to Me.
Yeah, I could see that. Suppose you're out in public. You could be at a restaurant, you could be at a shopping mall, anywhere in the world. You're somewhere and you start to hear the unmistakable melody of something you wrote. What goes through your head?
Great pride that something I've created and probably worried about a lot when I was first producing it. Something like that has caught the public's imagination, and it's there. It happens to me a lot, and especially with a song like Downtown, which seems to be on every piece of library music anywhere in the world.
Has there been any song of yours in particular, or maybe not a particular song, but an artist that you thought would be especially ideal for a song, a Tony Hatch song?
I think the question could be phrased even easier than that. Who do I wish that I'd been able to write for? Barbra Streisand, definitely. I've always been disappointed that I never made a bigger effort to just take a song to her. But every time I looked, she was recording a Broadway album or something specific to a theme, and so I didn't bother. But, Streisand is one of the incredible voices, and maybe somewhere along the line she'll do one of my songs. Michael Bublé, I think, is a great singer, and I'd love to write a song for him.
I could see Bublé doing a few of your songs. Now, at this point in your career, are you actively trying to pitch songs, or do you wait for people to come to you?
No, I still pitch songs because people still want good songs, but when you realize that most of my contemporaries and people who are making albums now are more likely to record a lot of songs that people know. So what you do is, if you can write one really brilliant song, you might be able to slip it into an album of standards. We have a couple of guys here, two really great theatre singers, Michael Ball and Alfie Boe, and they actually got together and they did an album together. I mean, it's quite strange, some of the songs that they do on the album as these two guys, but they also sing some solo numbers and they do a lot of numbers together. And I've thought to myself, really, I should have tried to write something for them. So there are the opportunities. One just has to be a bit strict about it and forget that you've had such a good run and it's lovely weather and I should be sitting at the piano with the aircon on instead of sitting in the garden.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the work that you've done as a producer. What approach do you take when an artist comes to you and says, I want you to produce my album?
I love working with people. I haven't done a lot of production in the last, maybe 5 or 10 years. But my approach is let's do this together. Let's feel good about it together. There can be no one better than, I'm not better than you, you're not better than me, so let's just work together. And I do love producing, and I do a lot of album stuff even now, mainly for myself and for a few artists that I'm associated with.
Is there anything in the near future with Tony Hatch you'd like to tell us about?
Well, if I could be a bit more disciplined than I am, I would love to get the book finished, because I've got so many anecdotes, so many people I've worked with, so many good stories about the music industry. I'd love to get that finished. I'm also working on a series, again, for television. We'll start it off. We still have a great radio tradition here. We have Radio 1 and Radio 2. And because of the size of our island, the United Kingdom, we still have a great radio system. And there aren't many countries in the world that can say that. I know radio is big in America and always will be. But here we actually produce programs. We have a fantastic orchestra called the BBC Concert Orchestra. And every Friday night, they have Friday night is music night, and it's a 2.5 hour, 3 hour program with selected themes. I love working with that orchestra. I do orchestrations for them. I conduct them. They featured my music in their programs, and once they gave me the whole program to do what I liked with, and that was fantastic. So I'm really I really enjoy just being a part of the music industry, and I love working wherever I can.
We're joined by songwriter Tony Hatch. In 2013, when you were inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, what did that feel like? Tell us about that experience.
That was a tremendous moment for me, because there's no doubt about it that the Songwriters Hall of Fame is very much an American institution. But they have been very, very fair over the years, and they've opened it up so they will recognize writers from overseas. And obviously, British writers probably become more recognized than, say, Swedish writers or a Norwegian production group. But I was very, very proud when it took me 3 goes. I was nominated 3 times, and I didn't make it. I think I made it the 3rd time, or maybe the 4th. But I was very, very proud when I got the call to say, yes, they're going to do it. And we've already called Petula, they said, and she's willing to come and join you. We'd like you to do a medley of your songs, and Petula will top it off with Downtown. And it was a magic evening there in New York. And the amazing thing was that we were at the Marriott in Times Square, and it was in Times Square that I erroneously thought I was downtown and wrote the first few notes and words of that song that's become so famous.
Very, very interesting. For some reason, what you just said, maybe just mentioning downtown, made me think of the scene in the Seinfeld television show where George and Jerry go back and forth and they're reciting the lyrics to Downtown.
And that's all they do. I mean, that is, it's incredible, isn't it? They've actually adapted my lyric and they play it. And it's just the way they present it and that works so well.
There was a broadcast I did where I played that little clip, the audio from that little clip on the air before going into the song Downtown. I thought that was kind of clever.
And you know, Will and Grace did a very similar thing. And I don't know whether they've followed Seinfeld or whether it was... but they did a similar thing. They were coming up in the elevator and doing exactly the same thing. He's saying, you know, when you're alone and life is making you lonely, and she says, I know, you could always go downtown. And but it did, I must say that it worked so well with George.
Oh, yeah. Downtown.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier about, I clumsily asked you what artist you thought could do a great job of a Tony Hatch song. A lot of songwriters have a song that they're particularly proud of. They think was a particularly good song, but it didn't catch on. What would that song be for you?
Oh, I've got too many of those. I've got loads of songs that I was disappointed that either the song just wasn't right for the time, or I had to put it on an album. But if you go through the Petula Clark albums, there are dozens of songs that just have a really nice feel about them. But we deliberately, to make good program material, we put them into an album. But afterwards, I'd listen and say, well, why did I do that? I've got so many songs that I one day before I've passed away completely, I will get them out and send them around the world. Actually, you see, you're one of those kind of people that spark off ideas. We live in an entirely different world to that when I wrote Downtown in 1964. Nowadays, I could just open my catalogue up, have my own website with the whole of the catalogue there for people to come and listen. Come listen to some songs that you've not heard before, and I didn't realise that I could just do that so simply.
Absolutely. That makes me wonder, what do you think about the role internet has had for songwriters today?
Well, there's good and bad, isn't there? I mean, there is no doubt about it that the creative people are losing or not making anywhere near as much money as they might be able to, and not being able to control their copyrights as well as they should be able to. But on the other hand, the freedom that one can use can create some really great talent, because anybody can feature a song on a website or on their own. You just email somebody something, and you could open a whole market.
You mentioned it in the email that you spend a good bit of the summer in Spain?
Yes, I do. I've always done that, going back to right back to 1974. And I really do love the sunshine. It makes me feel good. And I even lived in Australia. I lived in Sydney, which is a pretty hot place to live. I lived there for 14 years. And I worked there, and I created there, and I did a lot of production work and orchestrations and conducting. Yes, I love working with the Australians, and they're very, very talented people.
What is the best thing about being Tony Hatch?
When I get the opportunity to listen to something that I've created and I haven't heard it for a long time, that I feel pretty good about that.
One of the wonderful things about this age that we're in is the ability to communicate with people so rapidly around the world. For anyone who might listen to this interview, whether they're in Australia, whether they're in the United Kingdom, America, wherever, very open-ended, what would you say to them?
If they're listening now, I'd say welcome to the wonderful world of music, because if you're listening to me, then you're interested in this art form that so many people have been working on over the last few years. And you think how popular music has changed. When you think about when I first came into the music business, that was 1955. We still only had shellac and vinyl records. The 45 had not been invented. We were just moving into tape, quarter-inch tape, and stereo machines, two heads and a left and a right, and that was all. And it developed so fast. I remember that even as I was recording, I was constantly going back to our engineers saying, I've heard about this 4-track machine now. When are we getting one? And then the recording desk had to be. I think that over the last few years, an amazing, of course, with the invention of digital, everything was going to change. But I think it's been incredible for the music business. And the only sad thing is that there are a lot of writers and a lot of musicians, a lot of artists, singers that are not going to get paid in the future, because there is no way of beating the idea that music should be free. Everybody thinks that, but somebody has got to make it in the first place. Somebody has to invest.
We've been joined by songwriter, pianist, producer, Mr. Tony Hatch. If you'd like more information, you could visit the website. It's www.tonyhatch.co.uk. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Paul, for inviting me to have this little chat with you. I've really enjoyed it, and hope that you and all your listeners have as well.
I've enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Good talking to you.
Good talking to you.
Thank you, Paul.